Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Manuscript Podcast, where we believe 21st century man controls his destiny, that his choices define his future, and that he writes the script to his own life. I'm your host and fellow man, Reuben Stamper, and as always, it is an honor, a pleasure, and a privilege to have you all here with me today. Thank you so much for watching or listening, whatever you're doing today. I really appreciate it. So we're going to start off with a quote. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. The brave man is not he who does not feel afraid, but he who conquers that fear. That's a quote by Nelson Mandela, and it is relating to the topic of discussion today, which is the virtue of courage. Now, I believe courage may be one of the most universal virtues when it comes to manliness. I think all men aspire to be courageous. And so many of just the movies and the books that have existed in the past years that men have been like, damn, that main character is such a badass. It's because they're employing the virtue of courage. Like Christmas is coming up pretty soon. We're getting there. And, Die Hard, which is a Christmas movie, is going to be watched all across the country again. And I think that one of the reasons it was such a blockbuster hit was because John McClane, the main character, is constantly employing courage to the best of his ability. There are times when, he's faced with a terrible situation and he has to make a call as to what to do. There's that part where, was it Nakatomi, Mr. Nakatomi or whatever? He's like, faced by Hans Gruber and he's trying to get the bank code, and the guy's Nakatomi's like, I can't give you the bank code because I don't know it, and he gets his brains blown out. And at that point, John McClane's all eaten up because he's like, I could have done something, but he also recognizes that had he made himself aware in that situation, to the terrorists, that he would have been killed, and then he couldn't have helped the rest of the people in the building. And so he's just constantly throughout the show employing courage. That's why it's so amazing, because when he has to act and he knows the right thing to do, he just does it. He doesn't think twice about it. He just goes for it, And he gives everything as much forethought as he can, but he doesn't overthink things to where he thinks himself out of doing the correct action. And so I'm going to talk all about what courage is next, but it's kind of one of the things that I wanted to relate to you all. I think that's probably why that movie did so amazing, is because he does an amazing job, I think, of embodying the virtue of courage. So why should you want courage? Okay, aside from feeling like a badass, because if you're a courageous man, there's a ton of just tangible reasons why you should be courageous. It is, I don't want to say a luxury. It is necessary to be courageous if you're going to live a happy life, which, I've said before, the point of this podcast is for men to become happy. And if you are living a cowardly life all the time, you will not be happy, because I don't think you're fulfilling your nature. But that's a side note. Courage is a virtue that gets employed in so many areas of your life, whether it is your relationships, with the people you love, whether it is, facing a hard task in front of you, whether it is relationship with coworkers, asking for a raise, any of these things. Courage must be employed if you're going to live a life that allows you to sleep well at night, where you look back and you say, I did the right thing in that circumstance. It's so helpful in that regard. And obviously, being good at having tough conversations with people and being able to ask your boss for a raise and, being able to not run away from someone that's assailing you and to actually face the problem in front of you, those actually have tangible benefits outside of just feeling content as a man. But I do think that's also important. So I want to talk about two different types of courage. I talk about them in my book, but I believe that the two most prominent types of courage are physical courage and conversational courage. And you can kind of guess what those two things are about, but physical courage is what we think of when we see like action sequences and people aren't cowering or running away. They are just looking at their adversary in the eyes and saying, I'm going to win. I'm going to beat you. And that's super important in war. And actually the king of the virtues, as far as, the authority on the virtues, who is Aristotle, he says that war is actually the place where courage is the best formed. And there's a reason for that I'll get to later. But, the idea of physical courage is, like I talked about it before, but like if you're walking through a bar with your wife and somebody feels up your wife, like you cannot be a coward in the situation. You have to be willing to take on that other man and say, hey, that's not okay. You're going to apologize right now, or we're going to go outside. Because that's the right thing to do. You have to defend your wife's honor, your own honor. There's a lot of stuff going on there, but in instances like that, physical courage is required. But the thing is, in our modern world, physical courage is so rare. It's very rare that you're having physical altercations, but it is important still to have that ability, that ace in your back pocket to pull out when you are faced with an adversary like that. And then the second type of courage I want to talk about is that of conversational courage. And this is very, very prominent in all areas of the world. Whether you're talking with a loved one, you're talking with your spouse, your girlfriend, whoever it is, and you have to have a tough conversation. That's not fun. You don't want to go through it, but you also know that, the grass is a lot greener on the other side of that conversation. So it is worth having. It will give you a more fulfilling and happy life. But it's tough. You don't want to have the conversation, And that could be even, asking for a raise from your boss. I did this once. I was remodeling. I was getting better and better at it, and I could tell I was getting better. I could see that I was getting faster and more proficient in so many different ways. And my boss would tell me that every now and then. He gave me a lot of shit too, but he'd tell me that every now and then. And one day I was like, I feel like my wages should start to reflect that a little bit. But I had to go up and ask him. He wasn't going to just proactively probably come out and say, hey, I think you're doing a lot better. I'm going to pay you more, because it's just not in his mind. It's not he wasn't thinking about it. He had a lot of stuff going on with his life. He probably wasn't, dwelling on the fact that I thought I needed more money. So one day I just kind of got up the gumption. And I was like, okay, I got to go talk to him. And I thought it was going to be terrible. I thought it was going to be awful. I was going to go there and there's going to be a back and forth and a haggle. But I just went there and I talked to him man to man. And I said, hey, you've been saying that you've seen progress in the quality of my work and how fast I'm doing it. I have noticed it. I feel like I'm doing better. And I think my pay should reflect that. And he was like, oh, yeah, you're right. You're right about that. Yep, I'll get that changed for you. Let's get you a raise. And life was so much better after that conversation. But it sucked. I had to get the gumption, the courage to go up and actually have that conversation. Or if there's something in your relationship with anybody that you love that is bothering you big time, you should talk about it. Don't just leave it under the rug. Talk about it. And that's where courage comes into play. So I hope that I have convinced you enough that courage is vital to living a wholesome and happy life. So I want to talk about the three different types of men in regard to courage so that we can all kind of have a gauge on where we're at. I am certainly not perfectly courageous. I would say that hopefully I tend towards being the courageous man and not the coward or the rash man. But I want to talk about all three in regards to the virtue of courage. Because that's what Aristotle does. So he talks about, in regards to every virtue, three different types of men. And two of them are the extremes, and one of them is the perfection of the virtue. So in this case, obviously, we're talking about courage, so the perfection of the virtue would be the courageous man. The other two people that Aristotle brings to mind in regards to courage is the rash man and the coward. Now, I want to go in depth a little bit with those people because I once again, I think it's super helpful to have that, template to say, where do I fit in this puzzle? Am I more of the rash man? Am I more of the coward? Or am I actually tending more towards being the courageous man? So let's start with the rash man. The rash man is basically the Hulk. He runs in, he doesn't think about, he doesn't take time to think about the actual problem confronting him. He just rushes in and starts smashing shit. Like, he just basically acts without thinking. And that's not good. You need to have some presence of mind in the situation, and that's what the courageous man has. But the rash man just rushes in, and he just does things. Now, this is definitely more admirable than the coward, certainly, like 100%. And we'll figure out why here in a second. But the rash man, he acts without thinking. He just goes in and does shit. And a lot of times it causes way more problems than the situation actually calls for. Way more problems that just didn't have to happen. So let's go to the opposite extreme of the spectrum when it comes to courage, and that is the coward. So the rash man rushes in and does stuff, does shit just like without thinking. The coward thinks so much, and then he thinks himself out of the situation. And he backs away, and he runs, and he tucks tail, and he gets out of there. Now, every culture, from Kingdom Come, has always despised the coward. Because it's a deplorable state to be in. You don't want to be the guy that, when you're on the front line with all your comrades, everybody's in the front line, and you all have made up a plan to say, hey, we're advancing this time, or we're going to hold our shots till this time, or, whatever that plan is, and then you just tuck tail and run. You get out of there, and you save your own skin while your men are dying back there. It's a cowardly thing to do. And you don't want to be the kind of guy that stabs your friend in the back just so you can get out of a rough conversation or a tough situation. You don't want to be that guy, and that's what the coward is. You could think of him kind of as like Loki from the Avengers, right? So I've already talked about the Hulk. Why not talk about Loki? But he kind of always is conniving and lying and being distrustful and stabbing people in the back, like quite literally. But stabbing people in the back to get his own way or to get out of tough situations, or he's just fleeing, running away. And that's what the coward does. He doesn't look his adversary or his opponent in the face. He just turns away from him and runs. And that's not good either. One of the things, I need to get back into doing this, but, when I was in high school, me and my cousin started boxing each other. And for me, that was such a confidence builder, and like I wasn't good at it, and he's actually trained a lot now. He's really good. But we used to box together, and we didn't really know what we were doing. But what it forced us to do, when you're in that physical altercation with someone, like, you have to be thinking about what you're doing, and then you have to act. Because if you don't act, whether that action is like putting your hands up on your head so you don't get absolutely just walloped on, or just, covering yourself up in areas where you don't want to be hit, or actually, pushing through and making the punch or jabbing or whatever you're doing. And once again, I'm by no means great at this, but it was very helpful for me because it's one of those situations where you have to act. You have no choice, because if you don't act, you get the shit beat out of you. Like, that's how it works. And so that was one of the ways that, for me, that was very helpful, was like to kind of, I guess, tear away from that cowardice, is to just get into situations like that. But that's what the coward is. He tucks tail and runs. The fear overtakes his senses, and he cannot think. He cannot act because he just focuses on, I'm so afraid of that thing. I can't handle it. I can't deal with it. I'm out of here. That's what he says. And you don't want to be that guy, because there are truly important parts of your life that require the ability to say, hey, okay, this is a situation at hand. We've got to deal with it. Let's act right now, right? I mean, it's not only very valuable for your own self-esteem as a man, but it's super valuable to the people around you. I mean, damn, if people didn't know how to react when someone had a heart attack, I mean, how many more dead people would we have? Probably quite a few, but as it stands, a lot of the time, there's a man with enough courage to say, hey, everybody calm down, check his pulse. If he doesn't have his pulse, let's give him CPR, like keep him alive as much as we can. We're going to call an ambulance, get him there as fast as possible, and then we'll let the EMTs do their job. But having that presence of mind when it seems like the whole world's falling apart around you is very difficult. And that's where the virtue of courage comes into play. It's a pretty freaking awesome thing, if you think about it. So let's talk about the courageous man a little bit more. So we've talked about Loki and the Hulk as like the kind of the two extremes of courage. But I talked earlier about John McClane from Die Hard and why he's such a great embodiment of that virtue of courage. And it's because the only times that he, quote unquote, retreats is so that he can gain a better advantage. And that's what, that's like the one time that a courageous man can run away from something. He never runs away for the sake of running away. He runs away to gain an advantage on his opponent. And so, like, there's a great scene in the movie where Mr. Nakatomi, I believe is his name, because it's Nakatomi Tower, Yeah, so he's being questioned, and Hans Gruber is saying, we need the code to your vault so we can get your bank bonds. And Nakatomi's like, I can't give them to you because I don't know them. And Hans Gruber counts down like 3, 2, 1, and then blows his brains out. And this whole time, John McClane he's watching, right? He's looking at him, and he's like hiding under a table because the terrorists don't know that he's there, right? And you can just tell the acting's so great. But he's like, I want to act. I should do something. I should do something. But if I do anything right now, they're gonna find me and shoot me. And then everyone else in this building, I can't help them. They're done for. So he had to make a really difficult call in the sense that he didn't act there only because he knew that down the road, the only chance he had of helping the people in the building was to remain undiscovered. And there's so many parts in that movie where he's up on the farthest floor, and he's trying to deliberate about what to do, and he's like beat himself up because there's so many terrible situations that he's put into. But when push comes to shove, he acts. He does the right thing, and that's why he's such a great paramount character when it comes to the virtue of courage. Yeah, so we've talked about kind of what it is and why you should want it. Now let's talk real fast about how you get it. Now Aristotle in the book The Nicomachean Ethics, he says that courage, like all virtue, is done by doing the thing repeatedly and then actually having the situations to do the thing in. So unfortunately, in this world we live in, there's not a ton of situations that men are put into on a daily basis where like extreme courage is needed. That's just it's a lesser and lesser thing. So you have to manufacture situations where you are uncomfortable, where you don't feel like you've got everything under control, where there are a lot of outside influences on you that you have to handle. And I mean, that could be a lot of things. Like maybe you've never asked a girl out on a date. Go do it. Go ask a girl out on a date. It's just a date. It's just a date. She could say no. That's the worst thing that could happen. But go ask a girl on a date if you haven't done that. That requires courage. Like, man, my now fiance, I'm getting married to in January. I'm so glad that I had the courage to do this. But like, it was very difficult. Like asking her on a date. And I asked other girls on a date, so I guess I'd had some experience in that realm. But I really liked her. I thought she was awesome. And I knew it would be worth it to just see if she would go on a date with me, and then we'll see where things go from there. And so I, once again, built up the gumption and built up the courage, and I asked her on a date. And thank God I did, because things turned out, pretty amazing. We're getting married, and that's super exciting. But there's so many great outcomes that can come from just being courageous. So anyways, that's one example. It's like, okay, if you haven't asked a girl on a date, ask a girl on a date. Go talk to a stranger. That's one that I am, man, I'll tell you, gentlemen, I am not the best at doing this. Like, for instance, if I can order pizza online and then go pick it up, I will do that as opposed to calling people. But I need to work on just like maybe calling people, because that's something that I'm not afraid of, but it makes me a little uncomfortable. You have to interact with a person, and you have to kind of get a point across to a random stranger on the phone. Like, it's not really that big a deal. I know that. But if I can avoid it, I do. And so one of the things I can do personally, at least, to build courage is to say, hey, actually, I'm not going to use the app. I'm not going to get online and order the pizza. I'm going to call somebody up. I'm going to say, hey, listen, I need, a 2-topping pizza. I need chicken and red peppers. That's kind of a weird pizza, but you get the point. I need to put myself in the situation. Or another example I talked about earlier, ask your boss for a raise. If you think that your work is worthy of that, if you think you are worth that, go ask your boss for a raise. Just, I guess, in areas where you can build up this virtue of courage, where you can put yourself in a position to, employ courage in your life, go do it. Don't shy away from it. Talk to strangers. Go do something new. Go do an activity you've never done before where you're going to look like a dumbass because you've never done it. But you have to actually face the thing in front of you. Maybe you've gone, you want to go bouldering, and to go climb some rocks, but it's kind of daunting. You've never really done it before. You're going to be a complete noob, and you're kind of worried about what people might think of you for doing it, because you're going to look like an amateur, because that's what you are, go do it. Go do it. It can first off really build your self-esteem, because one day you'll look up and you'll say, "Oh, I actually can do that. I am capable of that." It's not, something that's so daunting I can't overcome it. And by building up these small little levels of courage, right? Just facing new things, new threats, new opponents. Like another idea is go box somebody. I was talking about that before, but I used to box my cousin. You have to act, But go do things like that, because it will build up these small little levels of courage. And then one day when something very catastrophic happens, like someone having a heart attack, like somebody, just berating a woman in a grocery store, you have the balls to just walk up and say, "Hey, no, I'm not going to allow it to happen." Or you'll be the guy that has a presence of mind to say, "Damn, somebody's having a heart attack. We got to act. We got to get people here fast. Somebody call 911. Like, you're that guy." Because it's helpful to other people, but it's also helpful to your own self-esteem and your own confidence in yourself in every situation. So that's really why I think courage is necessary for men. That's how you develop it. It's by small little things building up to where one day when a big situation where courage is required comes about, you say, "I'm ready. Let's do it." So become a courageous man. Work on it. I'm working on it. I've got a lot of room to grow. But it's something that I believe deep down inside is just completely necessary if you're going to live a happy and a wholesome life where you can sleep well at night. That's all for this section. I hope you enjoyed. Hey everyone, quick little plug for my book. It's called Modern Misery by Reuben. You can find it on Amazon.com. It's a book all about overcoming the hurdles that the 21st century throws at modern man. How you do that as a man in this weird, wacky world that we live in. So if you're interested, please head on to Amazon.com and check it out, or there will be a link in the video description below. Thank you so much for watching, and if you're interested, give it a read. All right, now, back to the podcast. All right, everyone, I want to talk about a study that I just read from the Pew Research Center on their website. For those of you unfamiliar with the Pew Research Center, it's a research center that talks about all things across the world, from economics to politics to social issues, all those things, and it does study after study after study on those things. It's very well respected because it has a tried and true method. It does a really good job of getting answers from all demographics in all different areas of a country. So when they say that their sample size is 2,500 people, it's not just 2,500 people from New York or Boise, Idaho. It's 2,500 people from across the United States. So I want to read this stat, and while I'm reading it, you may think to yourself, "Reuben, what does this have to do with manliness in the 21st century?" And I will talk about that after I read the stat. In a study done by the Pew Research Center of over 3,750 United States parents with children under 18, so they all have kids under 18, the number one concern held by the parents for their children was that of mental health. They were worried that their children were going to have mental health issues. Now, this kind of blew my mind. It kind of caught me off guard. Because, I was born in 2000. I do not think that the parents raising kids in 2000 would have answered that way. They would have answered with something like, "I am worried my child isn't going to find a great job," or "I'm worried my child isn't going to interact well with society," or "I'm worried, that my kid won't graduate college or won't be successful on a broad scale." I think those would have been the answers back then for my direct generation. Once again, I was born in 2000. Fast forward a couple years, I think the answers are different. Now, what changed? My generation, the generation born in 2000, was arguably one of the last generations to exist without the widespread adoption of social media and widespread internet use. Now, obviously, it started happening as I was growing up. By the time I was 10, Facebook was huge. By the time I was 15, Instagram was huge. All these social media platforms were popping up. But I was one of the last generations to grow up without that, happening when I was 5. It happened a little bit later in my life. And I think that was really good for me. And I do want to recommend real fast a book. It's called The Coddling of the American Mind by Jonathan Haidt, and it talks about this subject. It talks about the direct correlation, the link between the adoption of widespread social media use and the giant spike in the mental health issues with the younger generations. It's staggering, the results. Okay, so he makes a lot of assertions in his book, and he backs them all up very well, makes very coherent and logical arguments for them. I highly recommend it if you're into that kind of stuff and you're interested in how has social media affected the culture on a broader scale, and specifically the youth of the culture. So that was the answer by the parents, was they were worried, the majority were worried about mental health issues with their children. Now, let's get to the point where I talk about manliness in regards to this thing. Now, most of the other stats that I've talked about have been about, how is it affecting manliness, or what is this showing about manliness in the 21st century? And this is going to be kind of a negative note, and I'm going to make a broad assertion here. Get ready. And you can disagree. Put it in the comments below if you disagree with me. But I hold the belief that men are called to protect and provide. This is generally a widespread belief that most people would adhere to. They'd say that's true. Now, I also believe that under that protect, heading, there's a subheading. And there's actually two. There's just reactive protection, in the sense of like something is attacking my family from the outside, I am called to protect it. And no matter what that is, it could be there's a plethora of issues, right? That's the reactive side of things. If something's attacking me, I protect the family. I also think for men, there is a proactive side of this, not a reactive, but a proactive side, where we are called to create communities that benefit men, women, and children. Everyone. Men, women, and children. And I do not think that modern man has done a great job of that. So this section is more a call to action to myself, to you, to all the men out there, to actually begin to create stronger communities and foster communities where they take care of their members and their members take care of them. I think children right now, a lot of children and teenagers, are feeling incredibly isolated. And I think a lot of that, obviously, like I pointed to previously, is because of, phones and social media and, being in your phone and not being in the world. These are obviously issues that should be addressed. But I think a huge part of addressing those issues is actually just having great communities outside of those things that those kids can run to, that they can become a part of, that will help them to grow, and where they can feel safe because they know that the community's got their back and they can help, have the back of the community. So I think we've failed. I think we've really failed in that department. And, the good news is we can turn it around. I'm an optimist at heart, but I believe we can turn it around if we put our mind to it. And it's a big call to me too. I could do a much better job of supporting my community. Like my big community right now is my church. I could do a better job of supporting my church community. But whatever your community is, find a way to strengthen it and make it better so that you actually can foster an atmosphere where children can not be afraid of everything, that they can actually fail forward. They can make mistakes, but still be given grace and get back up and get back on their feet and, learn from their mistakes. I think that we've done a bad job of creating those communities. And, a big part of that obviously is I think parents in general, but men specifically. It's like we are called to protect, and that's not just to protect the people that are the closest to us. It is on a broader sense to protect everybody around us that we can, that is worthy of protection. Obviously, there are people who are crazy and, maniacs and serial killers. Like, obviously, we don't want to necessarily protect those people. But, the vulnerable, specifically children, it is our job to protect them. And that is not just a reactive thing. It is a proactive thing. It is going out and saying, hey, we are going to create an amazing community where men, women, and children can thrive. And I think we've done a bad job with that. And there's obviously a lot of people, I'm not trying to discredit the work of people, there are a lot of men who have worked super hard to create amazing, communities that children and men and women can be a part of. But I think on a broad scale, we failed. On a broad scale, most men, myself included, we failed. And we need to do better. And the good news is, we can change. The whole point of this podcast is that you can change. You can make choices. You can be proactive about things, And so I do believe that we can turn that around and we can create these communities that will help everyone to grow and feel like they're part of something bigger than just their phone, and we'll get rid of a lot of these mental health issues that are plaguing our children. It's incredibly sad. So, anyways, that's all I have to say for the second part of the podcast. I hope you enjoyed. And if you disagree with me, once again, I'm not going to shy away from a disagreement. Put it in the comments below. I would love to go back and forth with you if you're a respectful individual. If you're not, get the hell out of here. I don't care about you. So, that's all I have to say. Thanks for watching the second part of the Manuscript Podcast. And we'll move on to the third section, which is Reuben Rants. If you want to be a jackass, be a legalist. What is a legalist, you may ask? Legalism is the art of following the letter of the law and not the spirit of the law. Let me give you an example. So you're driving into work one day. It's a brisk fall morning. It's pretty dark. You got your big mug of coffee next to you. You're listening to your music. You're really enjoying your drive in. And you see this school zone little banner with these two little yellow lights that are blinking on top and bottom. Now, the speed limit normally is 45, but it's a school zone, so you're supposed to slow down to 25. So you do so, and you drive on through. The next day, you're doing the same thing. And you're driving, you're having a good time, and you see those lights. But you have a sibling in the school that is around those lights, that those lights are intended for. And you happen to know that sibling is out of school, and you happen to know because you talked to that sibling and you've talked to your parents that the whole school is out. No one's at the school. But for some reason, those lights are still flickering up and down, blinking. So you say, okay, I know no one's in that school building. The reason that law exists is so that I don't flatten or pancake a child. And I don't want to do that, obviously. So going 25 when that is the case and there are children running around who are reckless, yeah, absolutely. That makes sense to me. But when they're not there, that possibility of running over a child from that school is not there. So why would I ask, should you get pulled over for going 45 in that situation? That's legalism to me. See, this is just an example. Don't worry, folks. It's just an example. But imagine you're going 45 and you hear wee behind you and you get pulled over. And the officer says, "Oh, you're going 20 in a school zone." If you replied by saying, "Yes, officer, but there's no one in school," I don't know how well it would go for you, but I do genuinely feel like that is a legitimate excuse. I think you should be able to argue your case and say, I understand that I was going 20 over because I was going 45 in a school zone 25. I understand that. But the whole reason that law exists is so I don't run over a kid. And I don't know. I guess the thing is, legalism pisses me off because the spirit of the law is don't run over children. I can get behind that all day. But the reality of the law when there's no children there is that, well, the whole point for which that law was intended is not there anymore. So things could go back to how they were normally. Like go 45 and that 25. I just think that's reasonable. And it pisses me off. I don't think I like legalism in any sense. It's like when you get people that are so anal retentive about a game that you're playing that, they stick to the rules so hardcore that when there's a slight deviation that has nothing to do with how that game's going to end, they just get all up in arms about it. It's like, I don't know. The legalistic side of things, I'm not a big fan of. So anyways, this is my rant. I hate legalism. I think it's pretty bullshit. I think it completely destroys the integrity of a law. The law exists for the spirit of the law, not just the letter. Now, if you've ever heard of the movie Les Mis, there's a part where the main guy steals a loaf of bread, and then he gets 19 years in prison because stealing equates to, whatever, 19 years in prison or whatever it is. And, like, that's just how I feel. It's like, why would you get pulled over? It's like, imagine you're on a vacation and you're driving back home and you're 5 minutes away from your house. So you've driven this area time and time again, thousands of times. And it's 3 in the morning, okay? It's 3 in the morning. It's been a long trip. And you come to this 4-way stop sign stop, okay? But it's flat and you can see all around it. And it's 3 in the morning, so there's hardly going to be anybody out, but you do look, and you can tell because you've driven it thousands of times that there's no one coming up to the stop sign, so regardless, you would have right away. So, okay, you don't fully stop. You don't fully, you don't roll. It's not a rolling stop. You kind of tap and go, you hit the stop sign, you tap and go, and all of a sudden, you get pulled over, and the officer's like, I saw you run that stop sign. And you say, officer, I know that you mean well, and I need you to know that I mean the same. I have driven this thousands of times, and I understand why the law exists. It's so that people don't crash into each other, and so people don't just run through and crash into one another. But I've driven this place thousands of times. It's 3 in the morning, and I could see for a mile each way that there was no one coming. So I was going to have right of way. So instead of just fully stopping, I rolled through. And I do feel like that is a genuine excuse. Anyways, this is probably not going to look great on my record, but I just thought I'd share with you all. I think legalism is kind of bullshit, and it should be gotten away with. And I do think a lot of cops are actually very good with this, and they do follow the spirit of the law more than the letter. But every now and then, there are people out there, not just cops, but like people out there in general, who are so strict as to the letter of the law that they forget why the law was really there, what it was intended for. But legalism, let's get away with it. That's all I got to say for this section of the podcast, Reuben Rants. All right, everyone, that's it for today's episode of the Manuscript Podcast. Thank you so much for watching. It was an honor. I really can't tell you how much of an honor it was to have you here with me today. Thank you so much for watching. And as always, remember, there's a better life out there. Let's go.